Greetings in the love and light of the one infinite creator. My name is Jonathan Tong, and I'm facilitator for the Seattle Law of One study group. We can be found on the list of study groups at the L&L Research website shown on your screen. We can also be found on Facebook if you search for Seattle Law of One study group. We meet on Zoom Tuesdays from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and Saturdays from 7:30 to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You don't have to live in the Seattle area to join our Facebook group or join our Zoom sessions. Anyone who's interested and available is welcome to join. We do also have a YouTube channel under Seattle Law of One Study Group where you can see recordings of previous Q&As with Jim McCarty and other folks like Austin and Gary and Trish, who we are lucky to have us join us today for some informal conversation and questions and answers about the Law of One and how to live it in our daily lives. How are the three of you today?
Doing pretty great. Very grateful and honored to be here again. It's always so great to join you, Jonathan, and the space that you hold in this lovely group.
Ditto, and hello to everybody gathered and the familiar faces, including a couple of translators. Marion, hello. She's a local Kentuckian. Thomas, Daniel, Vasilis, Shayla was here. And all you lovely folks. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you all. It's such a joy to see everyone here. And yeah, did want to ask you about some of the public channeling sessions coming up. But before we do that, since the three of you have been so generous about giving your time to do these Q&As with this group and with Daniel's group in the European time zones, I wanted to put a little plug in for your Law of One podcast. It is to be found on the L&L research page. If you go to library, click on the library link, you can see a link for the Law of One podcast. And I understand that you just recently uploaded a episode 105, I believe, which was an addendum to the previous podcast on meditation. And I wanted to ask a little bit about that because I found some really fascinating anecdotes about not just your own meditation practices, but Carla and Jim also. I think you noted at some point, Gary, that Carla considered herself to be a fairly bad meditator, for lack of a better word. For folks who haven't listened to that podcast yet, and I encourage everyone to listen to it, as well as the rest of them, can you share with folks here who might be struggling a little bit with their own meditation practice what Carla and Jim's experiences were?
Sure. So Austin and I got together for episode 104. That was our main episode. And then subsequently, or rather, the episode was so long that we broke off a segment of it into an addendum to talk about our personal experiences in meditation. And to your question, yes, Carla considered herself a very poor meditator. What she wasn't poor at is perseverance. Every day, she and Jim ritualistically shared their meditation together in their morning offerings. The Gaia meditation at 9 p.m. after 9/11, they began that actually. And other times throughout the day. But in terms of her internal experience, I don't think she ever felt that she achieved one-pointed, or rather single-pointedness in attention and total silence of the mind and so forth. You know, Carla was a perpetually creative thinking person. So I think her inner experience was full of lots of thoughts. However, I also believe that it was contemplative. What she was thinking about wasn't so much, the groceries or the chores or the conflict with the person, though who knows, I can't speak to her inner thoughts. But she was bringing her mind to contemplation upon the creator, upon love, upon light.
So she took that in stride. She didn't get down on herself about that. She just found it a little bit more challenging perhaps than she thought it would be.
Yeah, she wore it on her sleeve and with a lot of grace about it.
Nice. Unlike Jim, who apparently planned out his landscaping day while meditating with Carla. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, and he will own this too. So if you're unaware, Jim ran a one-man lawn service outfit that he named creatively Jim's Lawn Service. That's like was the decal on the side of his truck, Jim's Lawn Service. And for years, I worked with him on Friday. So he and I would partner up on Friday. He worked solo Monday through Thursday. But it was something he had to launch in the early 2000s, I think. And yeah, that was that and Carla. There's the only two things and only two focuses in his life. So when he would meditate during that period, he was often using that space of meditation that, you know, they scheduled to plan for his workday.
That's funny. Totally understandable, though. Yeah. Appreciate your sharing that, and would love to come back to you in a little bit, maybe to talk about your 10-day Buddhist retreat experience. But I did want to ask Austin a little bit about his meditation practice too, because as I recall from the podcast, Austin, you talked a little bit about a breathing practice of counting to 10 and using something that is sort of like a Native American drum beat just to kind of help you focus. It sounded really fascinating to me, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit. And before you do that, I did want to remind folks on the call, if you have questions to ask of Austin, Gary, or Trish, feel free to put them in the chat window. I'll be looking to the chat window to see what next questions to ask. And Austin?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jonathan. And thanks for plugging the podcast too. We have been pretty irregular with publishing it lately, but we're getting back to it soon. But we always say that, so we'll see what happens.
Not like you don't have enough other things to do.
We do love the podcast though, and something it's really, our hearts are with the podcast. We want to keep doing it. So yeah, you mentioned two particular things in my my meditation practice. One of them, the drum beats that I would play in the background. I don't really do that anymore, but it was very helpful when I started meditating, as I talked about in the podcast. When I first discovered meditating, it was like when I first awoke to my spiritual path. I would meditate for hours a day. I didn't have a lot going on in my life, so I had a lot of time to meditate, and I was like enthralled with what these sort of states of consciousness that I discovered were available through meditation. And not only that, but the healing that I was experiencing through meditation. I went through a rapid transformation through that very dedicated meditation ritual that I had early on. And so the drum beat is very light. It wasn't like you said, sort of Native American kind of style drum beat in the background, very regular and consistent. And it was just a way to help, for one thing, block out like other external noise. If there's other, like, you know, street noise, or I lived with roommate noise and stuff like that. And there's something about repetitive rhythm, like neurobiologically, that helps the mind and the brain get into certain states, different states of consciousness. And so with that on in the background, the other technique that I eventually developed is just very, very simple. And I think this one was particular from Ken Wilber from the Integral Institute. It's very, very simply just counting your breath up to 10, and you count both the inhale and the exhale. So inhale 1, exhale 2, and you do that up to 10, and then you start back over. So you're not like seeing how high you can get. The point isn't necessarily anything other than just a way to focus your attention on one thing, on your breath, and allow that to become, you know, your mindfulness practice for the meditation that brings your awareness into a single point within that meditation, which in my understanding, or at least in my meditation practice, that's one of the primary reasons for meditating, is practicing a muscle that helps you to focus your mind, silence all of the noise that we always have going on in our mind, and allow you to really have this one pointed focus within yourself, not just for the meditation itself, but then that helps build a muscle for other types of spiritual practices.
So are you still using the breathing technique now? Is that part of your?
Yeah, it's so easy and it's so simple and it really works for me. So that's what I use. But I also, something I think is important to mention with meditating, because I think a lot of people do have trouble with it, particularly because our brains are just wired by society, particularly now with all of the digital interfaces that we have. Meditating can seem very difficult. And so I encourage people who have difficulty to explore as many techniques as they can to figure out what works for them, because there's not one good solution for everybody. And eventually you'll find something that clicks and it kind of feels natural. And I think if once you find that, just hold on to it.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Trisha, do you mind if I ask you if you have a regular meditation practice and what that's like if you do?
Sure. I'm probably the worst at this. I do not keep up anything too regular. It's funny that you ask this, because I actually felt this week the first time of being challenged in a way that showed me, oh my gosh, you might actually need to make this like a at least every other day thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Some form of catalyst, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, so when I'm at least doing it consciously for the purposes of, say, channeling, tuning, I do a little bit of that repetition of noise that Austin talked about in his previous experience, and I sync it up with a really basic visualization in my mind of going downstairs. So I visualize a step, and each step is in line with a breath, and that is accompanied by, all I can describe it as is like a bump, bump, bump. So each time I envision myself going deeper and deeper, and eventually I lose track of the actual visualization and I'm focused on the sound and going deeper, and then releasing the sound and just being in the deep space.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if that's similar to the drum beat that Austin was describing. It sounds like it could be.
Yeah.
So is that a meditation that you use before going into channel?
Yes. Yeah.
Nice. Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We could spend probably the whole hour talking about this, and I do see a couple of questions in the chat window, which we will get to fairly shortly. Gary, I know that you talked a little bit more at length about your 10-day Buddhist retreat that happened, how many months ago was that?
March 2022, last year.
Oh, so about a month or about a year. So I'm curious, looking back on it with a year's worth of hindsight, what are the impressions that you have of that experience now, and how has that affected your meditation practice as you do it now?
I actually do have a couple distillations to share from it. I was just sharing this with Austin, but first let me say something that I would like to say at the beginning of every opportunity like this, and that is, why is it that we are the focus of a Q&A? And we three, it's not because we're spiritually advanced or experts, of course, but we have the unique responsibility of stewarding LL Research. So anything we share, just use as a springboard for your own thoughts. Not that Jonathan sees us that way, certainly, but just in case it helps balance things.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and it's always a nice way to start off, just so we don't put anybody on pedestals. I'm pretty sure the three of you don't like being on pedestals or treated that way. Yeah.
No, there are no pedestals in this house. So yeah, how did it impact my meditation practice? So I came back hot and heavy. I'm going to meditate like X hours per day, 2 hours per day. And that's kind of unrealistic to keep going in a daily life practice. But among the fruits, I drank from that ocean of beingness that showed me what is not personality. It set up a sort of juxtaposition of the self I think I am and that I'm encompassed in on a daily basis and the beyond. And in that juxtaposition, so to speak, it showed me what a construct Gary Bean is, who I think I am, and all of my fears, doubts, hopes, thought patterns, eccentricities, personality quirks, and so forth. And how illusory the personality is, and how much peace there is available in that infinite wellspring, and how much of the personality needs to burn away, so to speak, or die in order to be rendered transparent to that eternal light, to that which is real. So among other things, that has stuck with me and been something of an inner compass or a source of guidance within. It's made me a little less attached to my personality, a little less worked up about it.
Nice. That might be the answer to the follow-up question I was going to ask, which is, why do you think meditation is so central to the law of one? I'm thinking more than any other spiritual practice other than loving, pretty sure meditation is the one thing that Ra and Kuo and all our friends in the Confederation have said time and time and time again is something that they encourage people to do. Do you think the reason for that is because of more or less what you just described, the feeling of burning away the illusory aspects of self and being able to find that state of oneness?
That's a really rich question, and there's lots of valid and good perspectives on that question. One thing that comes to mind for me is that the realm of thought is at the outer edges of beingness and of reality. And most of us, we veiled third density beings, are identified with thought. We're hypnotized with thought. Thought isn't just something that happens in our consciousness space as we experience it, but rather thought is sticky. It takes our attention and lulls us into sleep, so to speak. We enter thought like it's a dream. And meditation then in that regard is a way not of suppressing thought or eliminating thought per se, or making thought an enemy, but in creating that inner spaciousness that allows the self to step back from thought and abide in that which is not thought, in beingness itself. And that's the processes of mentation, of thinking, of cognition, and so forth, are really important and helpful tools, but they also perpetuate an illusion that there's a separate self living in here, relating to a lot of other separate elements of the universe. And unity, I believe, is only discovered in disidentifying from thought and abiding in beingness.
Yeah.
That's where oneness is, so to speak. And so it establishes a right relationship with the creator, and it's helps to release the illusion. I don't feel I'm doing the subject justice, but that's one perspective.
I think so. No, and that makes perfect sense to me. I do see actually someone has a question in the chat window related to meditation and breathing. Before we do that, may I ask if Trish or Austin, did you have anything you wanted to add to what Gary said before we go to another question?
Not for me.
That's good.
I think
Yeah, you bet. I see Tap has a question about breathing, and I'm going a little bit out of order in the chat window, but it is related to what we're talking about. Tap, would you like to unmute your mic and ask your question?
Yeah, actually, I need to read it again. So yeah, actually, you were talking right at the moment when I was writing about meditation techniques, and the what is happening actually to me quite off is that when I start to do breathing meditation, after I fall asleep, And you start to visualize, or I start to visualize some situation which I can remember after it, but somehow it feels like they were real, like they were unreal, but it refreshes my thoughts or my mind. So I was wondering if this happened regularly when you start meditation, Pet.
That's a great question. Any of the three of you want to field that?
Sure, here, I can take it. For the first thing about falling asleep, this is something I heard from one of the meditation courses that I took, or that I listened to. It's on great courses on mindfulness. He pointed out that sleep deprivation and lack of sleep is one of like biggest plagues of our society, basically, and said that if you fall asleep while you're trying to meditate, that's really not the worst thing in the world. If you're getting a few extra, moments of sleep in, it is good for you. So don't stress too much about falling asleep if you meditate. And I think that's a really helpful reminder, is that a lot of us are, suffering from lack of sleep, and that will, disrupt meditation, because if your body enters a state where you're still and you're closing your eyes, it's going to be like, all right, this is, now's my chance to get some rest. So don't stress too much about that. Definitely have fallen asleep plenty during meditations before. And particularly at the beginning, the comment about like visualizing situations coming up was absolutely very, very prominent, particularly when I started meditating at the very beginning. And I came to understand it as sort of a manifestation of what I was bringing in my desire in meditating. And I was desiring to discover myself and to heal certain things, and started making correlations, almost like they were dreams, but they had a different quality as dreams. That there was a reason these visualizations were coming up in meditation, and for me to experience them within this state of meditation, we enter a state of acceptance and more openness, and are able to bring things into our awareness when we meditate that hopefully we can experience them with a state of non-judgment or something like that. And so I started to realize things that would pop up when I was meditating, there was a reason they were popping up, and they were things that were asking to be looked at through this lens of the consciousness you have when you're meditating. And it was catalyst, and there were certain things I could do to help balance it and stuff like that. So for me, and I think it's probably going to be true for other people as well, the things that pop up in meditating like that, I think there's a reason. And however you want to approach it, you can, if you would prefer to just stay silent, sort of dismiss it and go back to the focusing on your breath, or like dive into the visualization and see where it brings you. And or just let it play its course. It sounds like describing it as a refreshing thing sounds pretty positive. So I definitely feel like there's no issue with that at all. So, but it is something I experienced for sure.
Tricia, is that something you've experienced in your meditation practice?
Absolutely, yes. And it's actually good to hear Austin sharing, because I've questioned that myself. Had a bit of insecurity of feeling like, if meditation is supposed to be this practice of, single focus, why are these things coming into my brain? So thank you, Austin, for sharing that, because that helps give me a little bit of insight into my own experience with it. And for me too, I think it's an act of self-discovery when those things come up. Realizing, often for me, it's things that I need to heal and accept within myself. Like it might not be specific in its presentation and its manifestation. It's not going to be like, hey, Trish, you need to work on this, but almost like dreams would be some type of sign that puts me in a direction towards healing and accepting something. And I've also had experiences where I feel like I'm communicating with higher self, or friends and family from afar, from different times. So yeah, I guess my meditation can sometimes feel a bit like a movie screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think so many of us get caught up in this thought process of thinking that meditation is supposed to be a really great spiritual awakening thing. And if we don't have a great technicolor mind-blowing experience, or we can't stop thinking about daily events, that something's wrong with us or something. So I appreciate both of you sharing that. Gary, was there anything you want to add to what Trish and Austin said?
No, I appreciated their reply.
Yeah, thank you. I want to go ahead and ask a different question, and I believe somebody's got a question in the chat window that might dovetail with this. Wanted to talk a little bit about the public channeling sessions, because I believe you just started doing this fairly recently, right? What month did you start doing that?
November?
November.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and if I remember correctly, there was a fair bit of understandably feeling a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of nervousness. I can't even imagine, I mean, what it's like to channel just with the 5 of you in one room, much less channeling with a whole group of other people that you may or may not know. And I remember that you had 1 or 2 sessions where you asked some test questions to see how well you'd be able to handle questions that were a little bit out of your normal comfort zone. So my question is, how does it feel at this point with a few months of hindsight looking back on it? What do you feel that you were anxious about that you realize now wasn't really that big a deal? And what do you still find perhaps daunting or challenging in it? Yeah, the ball is, I just kind of like threw that ball out there for anybody to respond to. Austin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. I, in my life in general, have some social anxiety, so it still is a pretty anxious situation for me. But as with any kind of anxiety, the more that you go through the process and kind of step into the anxiety, and then you come out the other side and you haven't died, you're like, oh, I didn't die. So it gets a little bit better each time. But there's still a lot of nervousness, especially because, as you're saying, we started this in November, but this is to give some context to anybody who's not familiar. Most of the channelings prior to this, before the pandemic shut down, were live channelings, public channelings that anybody could come to. We primarily started our channeling practice. It was before the pandemic happened, but we really kicked into gear during that quarantine period. So we hadn't channeled publicly for anybody because we were primarily doing it during the pandemic. So when we started up again in November, it was a new experience for us. And, we were concerned, I think some performance anxiety, but also just, as you were saying, our questions were kind of curated. We were able to really focus on what questions we wanted to focus on when we were just channeling as a group. Whereas you make them open to the public and anybody can ask any question. There is a way that the questions can affect the contact and can affect how the Confederation responds and stuff. So, so far it's been, we were a little concerned, but the questions have been great. And I think a lot of my nervousness and anxiety personally through the experience has been abated just through the experience, and the groups that have been showing up. We've, some regulars showing up weekly now have been really great. And then there's new faces every week. People are traveling to come to the channelings from, different places in the country. And it's been a great, really positive experience, and that positive environment is very supportive for us, which I think helps a lot. So it's been a really great experience.
It sure seemed that way as I was reading the most recent channeling transcript from January 23rd or something that I believe just got uploaded a few days ago to the website. There were more than a couple comments there that really suggested that you had created a really beautiful, safe, nurturing space for all to be there, and that our friends in the Confederation felt that and appreciated as well, in addition to the channels. Trisha, did you have any thoughts on that? How's it been for you? If I remember correctly, you had more than a little bit of trepidation going into this.
Who, me? Yeah. Yeah, it was terrifying. For the reasons Austin listed. I too have pretty intense social anxiety, and then performance anxiety, wanting to, do well at this service that people so deeply cherish and are traveling out of their way to witness. And I was and continue to be blown away by how, like, amazingly, whoever shows up, however they show up, it becomes this beautiful crystal. Like, we can just so effortlessly, like, harmonize and focus our energies, and I'm having a hard time describing it. There's just some really magical power happening in that circle. And that's not to say that doesn't exist when it's just the 5 of us who are channeling, who are together. I think there's just a new level of realizing responsibility, because I think it can sometimes, as many things in life can, we can forget how important something is if we continue to do it, if it becomes routine.
Sure.
And I think also, just adding new energy, new people, new experiences, new questions that are outside of our realm of experience has really opened our hearts and strengthened us and inspired us. So I've been really silenced in a good way by the whole experience.
What a beautiful thing. And do you think Carla is laughing at this? Do you think that's what she meant when you had that little contact experience with her in Berlin? Yeah. Or if I remember correctly, she was saying something to the effect of quit stressing out over all this stuff.
I could see her in a kind way rolling her eyes like, oh goodness, guys.
Chill out.
It's fine. Like Austin said, he didn't die.
Yeah, but you could have. Yeah. No, I totally relate to what you're talking about with performance anxiety. I mean, I experience it in my own little weird, mundane world. I can't imagine what it feels like for the 3 of you, 5 of you, to be doing what you're doing that way. I saw Thomas has had his hand up for a long time. I'm assuming he wants to ask a follow-up question on this subject. Before we go to Thomas, Gary, was there anything you wanted to add to what Trish and Austin have shared?
Yeah, first I wanted to say that Carla had a congenital sense in that she was born with it, that people wanted to hear her. She told a story about being a child and being on the local Louisville bus and walking up and down the aisle on the bus, talking to people in the assumption that they wanted to hear from her. So
and you guys have had no such experience for yourselves.
Not whatsoever, no. So that really supported her channeling. And I would echo everything Austin and Trish said and add that, and I know they share this as well, that it's a little nerve-wracking when somebody asks you as a human being for advice or feedback or so forth. And, like, you have the opportunity to impact their life for better or worse. Of course, they are responsible for what they choose to do with whatever you say. But in channeling, you're not yourself. There's something ostensibly, allegedly higher coming through you. And the people are going to relate to those words in a different way. And that's kind of frightening for me, that someone could have a deeply meaningful personal question that they ask, and whatever is spoken through you is going to have an impact on them. So that's a little scary. However, like Austin and Trish said, having done it a few times now, it's been energizing. And I don't feel that I personally have been completely tested in all scenarios. I haven't received a bad question yet. exactly. But yeah, the group that gets together is we come together, we're in a circle of equals. The instruments don't have special status. We don't have more time to share ourselves. We go around the circle and everybody there is sharing themselves, and it's just blended really well. And there's a buoyancy and there's a joy and a gratitude to be there. I think people feel a sense of security and belonging, safety, and just more of an ability to share. And that's half of the channeling experience. The public sees the half where we're channeling Quo and it turns into a transcript. The other half is this circle saying, this is what's important in my life right now. And it may be something trivial, but often it's something deep that they're going through. It's not uncommon to find tears in the circle, or people expressing anger because there's something that's really bothering them of late, or so forth. But that all three of us really love the round robin portion before the channeling. And yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I have gotten a sense from just the references to that in the transcripts that sharing really is an important part of the tuning process, for lack of a better word, just in terms of the group being able to develop some sort of group vibration and group cohesiveness that might inform how the rest of the channeling goes. Thomas, you have been so patient waiting to ask your question. Thank you for waiting. Did you have a question on this subject to ask?
Yeah, I don't know. It's all about meditation and channeling. I have to say one sentence about, for me, everything changed at Mount Untersberg when I met Gary, Trish, and Austin and Jim. And since then, I already meditated for 14 years, but since then, I have many subjects about the law of squares, I would ask. Then I have now light balls in my meditation since I met you. So for me, it's quite connected with LL research, but I have no clue. When I meditate, there is a light ball circling around me, and it's totally new for me. It's since I met you guys. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask you, the third thing was carrier wave. I had the impression some minutes ago that an entity told me, hey, ask about carrier wave. We are here to help. So the three questions, carrier wave, do we have something like light balls in meditation, and law of squares? I don't know, to push people who are starting to meditate more. I don't know.
That's
three great questions, to be sure. Gary, do you want to start off on this one?
Sure. So thanks, Thomas. I love hearing you talk, and I love the working of your mind. Thomas and we got to spend some time together a few years ago before the pandemic, and like he mentioned, outside of Untersberg, or in Untersberg. So law of squares comes from the law of one, and it seems to be a property of reality, a sort of metaphysics, wherein when people combine in shared intention and shared mission and shared focus, that the power of the second person doubles the power of the first. The power of the third person doubles the power of the first two, the power of the fourth, etc. So that when there's a group of beings seeking together, they generate a power and a capacity that is not only greater than the sum of their parts, but is exponentially greater. If you go to the book A Concept Guide, there's a chapter called Calling, and this law of squares, or law of doubling, it was called once or twice, is explained or explored in depth in that book. But it is actually the law of squares, for a brief side tangent, that creates window for the Confederation to be of service here, because the law of squares also creates a calling on planet Earth. Those who call, who in their calling emit a certain vibration or hit a certain note, even though they may be separated around the planet, even though they may not be, working together under a shared roof, their call blends and combines, and the power of that call is doubled and doubled and doubled again. And that creates a strength that opens a door for the Confederation to be here. In fact, I'm pretty sure Ra says at one point, like, we're fortunate for the law of squares, because were that not the case, then we wouldn't have sanction to be here, of course. So how that intersects with your meditation practice, Thomas, I'm not too sure, except to say that it would apply, of course, to meditating with other people. As Ra says, those who together seek shall more surely find. So, meditation on one's own is powerful in and of itself. But if you have a friend to do it with, just like if you have a friend to exercise with or to do anything with, and you're there in shared spirit and shared purpose, it has the potential to enhance and deepen both your meditations. And it sounds like you're also having a phenomena with a light bowl, you said, around you, and you're getting this thought about carrier waves. Austin or Trish, do you guys have any thoughts about?
I have a thought about the light ball. It's interesting you say that, Thomas. In the last channeling, that unfortunately Gary and Trish weren't able to be there, that one of the attendees said that when she was meditating during the channeling, she saw lights, and asked if that was a frequent thing. I think that it is, that is a common thing that we hear about, at least somewhat common. In my personal experience, these types of things tend to be pretty subjective in their meaning, so that, whatever it means for you could be different for whatever it means for somebody else. And I personally, sometimes, like when I meditate, I'll see like flashes and just like crazy lights. Sometimes it's nothing. And I typically take it, when it seems pretty true, to be that I'm really sort of like in the zone, both during the meditation and in my life. My thoughts are pretty focused on the higher goals, and I'm feeling like I'm kind of just in the right groove in my life. And typically when I feel that way, that's when the lights are going crazy when I meditate. And it kind of is, for me, kind of like an affirmation, but I think it can mean something different for anybody else. And it's kind of something you have to explore yourself. I think that kind of thing takes a lot of patience to figure out what it means specifically for you. And it requires a lot of like self-inquiry. And then the carrier waves, I understand the concept from like telecommunications, but not sure how it would specifically relate to anything we're talking about.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, for what it's worth, I seem to remember at least one channeling session where Quo said something to the effect that if you could see us, we would appear to you as a ball of light floating around the room or something like that. I don't remember when it was. I'd have to look it up, but who knows? Maybe you have some good company there. Trisha, did you have anything to add on the subject?
I think they covered it pretty beautifully.
That's good. Thank you. I did want to double back to the chat window. I know Ishan had a question a while back about public channeling sessions. I'm not sure if he's about to ask the same question that I was going to ask, but I'll give him the first shot at it if he wants. Ishan, would you like to unmute your mic and ask?
Thank you, John. Hello, Trish, Grisha. Austin. I would like to let you guys know the beings, first of all, I am getting an overwhelming, amount of, green ray from you guys, when both of you guys talk, when you talk, Trisha sees you such a unity in such a love, man. It's so amazing watching you. And when Trisha talks and you are in such a unity, and you are so one with each other, so overwhelming amount of love within you. It's so amazing watching you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So,
and me, Ishan, are you getting any green light from me? Because I'm really trying to crank it out here. I'm doing the best.
I know that's you being drawn.
Yeah. I'm sorry. And
Could you turn it up a little bit more, Jonathan?
I'm giving it all. I'm giving it all I got, Captain. Sean, what's your question?
Yeah. So my question was regarding the last call with Jim. I had asked him whether you can do the channelings on Zoom calls, like you channel the confederation, and whether we can do it on Zoom call this way, like I am from India and many other people from around the world, and they can connect with the confederation, and this will be of more service to the complete planet social memory complex. That would be great. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a thank you, Ishan, for sharing that. We're actually, if you dropped in on us on any given day, Trish, Austin, and I, and then the circle expands to Jim and Daniel and Joanna and so forth, we really get along. Actually, we work really, really well together. So I presume that there's a lot of green ray energy flowing between us, because I think we all accept one another in our glorious imperfections. So that is a question of which my companions have a lot, and I have much less. That is a question people ask, and it's one that we've considered, and we haven't been in favor of it so far. I mean, it's subject to change, but one mitigating factor, and I'd be interested in if Austin has any other thoughts on this too. One mitigating factor is the protected space we create in that physical location. Jim performs the banishing ritual there every morning, and has, I think he said, since the late 90s. Like 4:30 a.m., 5:30, something ridiculous. He wakes up, does the banishing ritual in that room, and there's various other protocols we go through to tune and protect the circle. So it feels like a very protected space. So there's a little hesitance about opening that up. There's also some hesitance about the extra electronic equipment. And a third factor that comes to mind, that, these aren't hard no's, it's just things that come up for us that we have to navigate. So a third one that comes to mind is we definitely don't want to put our faces on a screen and channel, because we feel that risks glorifying the person, and instead of hearing quo, you're seeing the person and tagging the message to them. Obviously, the instrument has an impact on the information coming through. You can't separate the instrument from the source in conscious channeling. Now, we could just do an audio stream to avoid that one. So that's not a full hard stop, but those are some complicating factors for us. Austin, are you aware of anything else that's been part of our conversation on that question?
I think you covered most of the practical factors. The only other thing that I would kind of interject is that, there's a question of whether it's possible versus whether it's something that we would consider. And Ella Research has developed a channeling technique over decades, mainly Carla developing a protocol to channeling. And ever since the beginning, that channeling has been mostly as a group together in a room, and it has worked very well. Based on the decades of channeling transcripts, you can see just the fruits of the labor of that kind of process and protocol. And so while there might be other processes and protocols that are effective that could accommodate something like doing it over Zoom, we would generally be pretty hesitant to change something or explore those, just because of how effective and how great the process has been for Ella Research so far. And it, we're hesitant to change it. And also, everything Gary said, it relates to what we were saying with the previous question about the group that comes together. Jonathan, you were talking about how that round robin and the sharing really generates a field that then becomes like this seat for the channeling itself. And there is something about doing that together in a room with other people that Zoom and online telecommunications are great, but I think most people can recognize the difference of doing that in a space together versus doing that digitally. Not that it's not possible, but there's something there that is kind of hard to pinpoint necessarily.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
It is completely understandable, like how refined the process you have created within years of channeling, and how hesitant you may be in changing the ways of how it may lead to your relations with Confederation. And I would like to know, like, is there any way, like people like us, I want to channel like Confederation. So I I can get a sense of my higher self when I meditate. I can get solutions for my problems. But I want to channel like extraterrestrial beings, like from Confederation. Like I want to be in touch with them, and I want to have that experience. Is there any way that we can do that? I can do that.
I wanted to quickly add a note to your previous question, Hassan, and validate your desire to connect to a channeling circle. It's a legitimate need, and what we're sharing now isn't forever. Also, we may change, because I think it could be of service to a lot of people around the world. As to your own desire to channel, how can you do that? We share everything we know through Carla's teachings on llresearch.org. In fact, there's a whole section dedicated to resources for learning to channel. It's not a step-by-step instruction manual, but it is. We literally recorded in 2008 Carla giving a weekend-long intensive, we called it, a class, where she shared everything she knew about channeling. And there's also another very thin book called A Channeling Handbook that Carla wrote that's more about the principles and the ethics and the metaphysics of channeling. It isn't so much instructional. So LL Research doesn't teach it exactly, but we do offer resources for anybody who wants to adventure out on their own. There's lots of different ways to channel. LL Research just has its own way that it has developed, thanks mostly to the innovation that Carla brought to channeling. So if you wanted to practice LL Research protocols within the LL Research tradition, then I would just counsel that channeling is a serious business. It is not a hobby like others, because it involves, or rather it necessitates, that the instruments live to the best of their ability, imperfect as they are, the message. So it involves living an ethical life. It involves, if you're channeling about seeking the creator, it involves you applying that to your life. And there's some other very important safeguards, three of which are the necessity to channel in a group. So always a minimum of 3 people to receive a universal contact, and the indispensable requisites of tuning and challenging. Because when you serve as an instrument, you are opening yourself up to a very populated non-physical universe of entities that have things to say and would love nothing more than to speak through you. So you want to tune your radio dial to the right frequency so that you get the highest and best, and you get a positively oriented source. And then challenging is part of that. You challenge the source that wants to speak through you, in the name of whatever principle is most highest and dear to you, whether that's unconditional love or some avatar. For instance, it was Jesus Christ in Carla's case. But a big subject. It's a few pointers that may be helpful for your consideration.
Thank you. So I would like to have another question, and after that I have no questions at all. So
Sean, if you don't mind, we're actually approaching the end of our hour, and there are a couple other folks who had questions in the chat window. Do you mind if I let them ask their questions and then double back to you?
a little question, and I will just make it a finish. It is a small question, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Okay. So my question was regarding the balancing. So the balancing of energy ray centers, specifically yellow ray energy center. So I have a high intensity of yellow ray energy center. So how should I balance it? By increasing the energies in other energy centers, including the green one, or decreasing the yellow ray one. So which is more beneficial?
difficult to answer questions like that for specific individuals, because I do think that, you know, the energy dynamics of our energy bodies can be very unique, and that's kind of, I fall back on that a lot. Everything is unique, everybody's unique, so it's hard to address things specifically. My general response would be not necessarily to focus on the energy centers themselves, but on the catalyst that we receive in our daily lives that are giving us feedback about which energy centers are unbalanced. And through processing catalyst and through balancing the catalyst that we receive on a daily basis, that will naturally then help you balance your energy center. So if you need to, you know, increase your green ray, you'll receive catalyst that will call you to, you know, help increase your green ray. If you need to do things to help to, you know, bring your yellow ray down and keep it from being overcharged, you'll receive catalysts that will help you to do that just through experiencing it, bringing it back at the end of the day, meditating on it, and going through like the balancing exercises that Ra talked about. So it can be unique for everybody. And I would just suggest to make sure you're utilizing Catalyst and paying attention to the feedback you're getting in everything you experience.
Thank you so much.
I did want to go to a couple other questions in the chat window, and before we do that, I did want to double back on the subject of the online participation in channeling sessions, because that was in fact a question that I was going to ask at some point. I know it came up with Jim last time we talked, and I only wanted to note that this group has only been doing the public channeling sessions since November, and that is a huge undertaking in itself. So to ask them to all of a sudden expand that circle to the rest of the world seems like perhaps we might want to give them a little bit more time to kind of get their feet settled. But yeah, I know there have been previous sessions where there was actually online participation. It was by phone. I think there were audio calls or something like that. So boy, if you see fit to do that sometime in the future, would love to see that. But I'm sure you'll know when it's time. Otherwise, I wanted to go back to Tom, who had a question way back at the beginning of our session. Tom, would you like to unmute your mic and ask? And I'm not talking about Thomas, I'm talking about Tom. Is Tom still here? I have lost track. Looks like Tom might not be here anymore. Never mind. How about Ukamoto? Did you still have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I actually grew to have a couple follow-up questions. My question ended up being answered indirectly in the course of somebody else asking theirs. But because of, in the interest of time, I want the rest of our brothers and sisters to be able to have theirs. And I'll just catch our brothers next month. But I wanted to tell you, Austin, Gary, and Trish, I love you all so much. I probably need to come earlier, but I got you all next month. Love you all. Jonathan, I love you and can't wait to see you sometime this week.
Likewise. Hey, I did not mean to be like that strict with the time. If you have a question you wanted to ask Ukamoto, we have time for it. Go for it.
Okay, in that case, I'll go ahead and ask. So going back to the law of squares, and I'm very prepared for this question to be kind of, you know, a little inconclusive for all of us, but here it is all the same. Is it a situation to where it's like, okay, it's not the total group squared, but it's like, is it, let's say you got 4 people, is it the first person squared, second person squared, third person squared, because of the fourth person, or is it the 3 square, is it the 3 put together, them being squared by the first and second and third person, and then that total number being squared again by the fourth? The second question being as follows: is it a huge concern that due to other, you know, when you have people that are, you know, channeling is a very delicate process and undertaking, as you said, Brother Gary, is it a huge concern that eventually, obviously I haven't heard any indication that this has happened yet, but eventually, could there be someone who carries with them such a, and we'll just summarily call it catalyst, a catalyst with them, be it spiritual or whatever the case may be, that it could affect the channeling? Is that something that obviously you all foresee being a quote unquote issue? That's it.
You want to tackle it
Ukamoto,
first,
thanks for the good questions. So I think I'll take the one about the law of squares. I just got out my handy concept guide because there's literally a table. It sounds like we're interested in sort of the mathematics of what that looks like. And in fact, Ra gives a number because Don's trying to explore how the math of the law of squares works. And Ra says that for 10 people calling, such that the law of squares is operating for them, that the number would equal 1024. So in the book, that is mathed out in a table. So you have, Ra says, the call begins with 1. This call is equal to infinity and is not, as you would say, counted. It is the cornerstone. Don't ask me exactly what that means. We'll just take Ra at their word there. And then the second person doubles the first. So the second person added would equal a number of 4. And then the third person comes along and doubles the first 2. So you have 8. And then the fourth person comes along, doubles the first 3. So you have 16. And you could see how, if you plotted that out, what that would look like on an XY graph, such that it's not a linear progression, but, you know, a big curve that starts to skyrocket straight up until you get to the 10th person doubling the previous 9, so that the number is 1024. Why exactly that is, or what exactly the consequence is, I mean, we can infer some consequences from the law of one, but otherwise I run into my own intellectual limits of understanding. And I have thoughts about your second question too, but I'm interested in Austin or Trish, see what you guys have to say.
The second question was about the concern about bringing in catalysts into our channelings and it affecting the message, correct?
I think Ukamoto, the angle was like, could somebody have something innate in their energy system that is maybe even disruptive or adversely impacts the channeling circle? I think, is that right, Ukamoto?
Expound on your reception of the question so that the brevity of it can be answered just as well. That, and on top of that, the energies that aren't inherently within the person, or the misalignments or the blockages of the person, but the energies, spirits, you know, pre-incarnative programmings, you know, the whole shebang, you know, could be brought in, and as we know, all it takes is one person. Is this a concern? And if not, what brings us to not be so concerned?
I'd like to hear what Austin thinks first.
Okay, to the extent that I understand the question, I think it kind of goes back to Gary referenced Carla's book, A Channeling Handbook, which she describes channeling as a lifestyle, not a hobby. And so it requires your entire being to be aligned to this service. It doesn't necessarily mean it's your focus for your entire life, but it does mean that, you know, you are preparing your entire being for performing the service to the best of your ability. And it is, I think, possible, what you're saying, to bring catalyst and also all these other influences into a channeling circle and cause a disruption. And I think for us, I don't think there is a concern. I think focusing on a concern like that might, you know, help to exacerbate it. But so long as we trust each other and trust that we are all doing the work that we are, you know, have agreed to be doing as channels in a circle, and following Carla's guidance, because, you know, she was, in our view, one of the best channels to ever live, and has developed a system that is incredibly effective and, in our experience, incredibly safe. And the safety protocols she developed, we don't fully understand them to their deepest extent of why they work, but we have seen, based on the decades of channeling that she did, that they do work. And so we trust in the process and we trust in each other. And I think that's enough to kind of, for us, eliminate any fear in that regard.
Thank you. Trish, Gary, anything to add to that?
I have a thought, not so much about how it would affect the messaging, but I would just speak really quickly to the fact that the catalyst I spoke of earlier that is making me feel like I need to create a more standard meditation practice was that I felt like I was bringing my physical, mental body into the channeling practice, which didn't so much, in my opinion, affect the messaging that was coming through coming through me rather, but it affected my ability to focus, to effectively communicate the messages that were coming to me. So I think the content was accurate and was there, but I can speak to the fact that, you know, the energies you bring in can definitely affect your ability to focus, can affect your ability to be as clear a channel. Not so much dimming the light or coloring the light, but narrowing the channel through which the light can come through. Were you going to say something to that? Okay, that's all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gary, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, and that's that. You know, if you're a positively oriented person, you're generally seeking to harmonize with those with whom you're interacting in some way. I mean, you're not seeking to come in and impose or dominate or be disruptive, though we all have had moments like that where our catalyst comes out sideways, of course. But point being, somebody entering the channeling circle is entering an established field. Not only establish that particular moment, but that has a residue, a psychic residue that has been built and crystallized in that particular space for a long span of time. So they're likely, whatever particular catalyst they may be holding, whether it's sourced pre-incarnationally or it's just something that's come up for them this week, that's likely to be harmonized with that pre-existing field, and if not diluted in a way. And in my own, I've been channeling with not channeling, I've been attending channeling since 2002. I've never seen anybody act out. It's certainly possible that a certain disruptive behavior may manifest, and I'm not sure that Carla or Jim ever have before, but it is a recipe. And just like a soup, for instance, a soup consists of multiple constituent ingredients, and if you start adding, say, I don't know, too much salt, it might change the overall flavor palette of that soup. But usually I don't think that any one individual is going to derail or adversely impact the energy quotient, so to speak, or some energy signature of the channeling circle.
So, do you think it would be fair to say that if somebody wants to channel a Confederation entity, that they do have to have some certain amount of purity of polarization toward service to others as opposed to service to self as just part of their innate vibration signature?
Yeah, 100%. What that threshold is, I don't know, and it doesn't mean that, you know, we need to be Jesuses or perfect. But yeah, one needs a certain stability, a certain minimum level of chakra activation and balance. Definitely, you know, if there's instability within the self or severe, even what we would call mental illness in some way that needs healed, that person is not poised to do channeling in a safe and reliable manner.
Yeah, I'm remembering the paint chip metaphor that Ra used to describe how they searched for a long time to find some group of entities who had the right they compared it to a paint chip that had the right color, the right tone, and I would assume that means the right vibrational signature for them to work with. And so,
Good point. Yeah.
thanks. I did want to put in another plug for the concept guide. Do you still have that on you? Would you mind holding that up to the screen and talking so that you're on big screen? And yeah, that table that you were, oh, I'm sorry, I'm probably on the screen right now. If you could flip to the page that's got that law of squares table on it. I have looked at that many times and found that super helpful.
Is you seeing that okay?
Yeah, it's a beautiful, helpful tool. The whole book is beautiful and helpful, and I believe you had some hand in writing that, I believe, Gary. It's a beautiful piece of work that I've gone back to many times and can't recommend it enough, and can be found in the L&L library for sure. Hey, we are running a bit over time. I know there were a couple folks who still had questions, and I'm going to give them the option of asking their questions if they're still really wanting to ask those questions, or if they're willing to wait until next session. That would be cool too. Bill, I know that you graciously offered to let others ask their questions before you. Very STO of you, my friend. Do you want to ask that question before we wrap up, or are you okay waiting till next time? Are you there, Bill? If you are, your mic is probably muted, and I am not seeing him in particular. Nate, I know you had a question that appeared last in the chat window. Would you still like to ask your question, or are you okay waiting till next time?
I can wait till next time unless there isn't anyone else that asked before me would like to go.
I don't think so. I think you would have the last question, and we're
Awesome.
perfectly happy to make time for it if you want.
Cool. Well, nice to meet you guys. This is only my third time with this group. I wasn't planning on asking this, but it just kind of came up as I've also been watching some of the replay YouTube videos with the three of you. Has the thought ever occurred, and not to put any, I know we talked about social anxiety earlier, but has the thought ever occurred that perhaps the three of you, what's that?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, has the thought ever occurred that perhaps the three of you might be being prepared to eventually resume direct contact with Raw? I know it requires at least 3. And I know that, Kuo, that Raw is involved with Kuo channelings and such, but just wondering if that's ever crossed your mind, and if so, what would that look like? Does it require you to intentionally try to contact Raw, or would he happen to just hop in, or would Raw as a group happen to just pop in and into, like, unplanned into a channeling session?
We do leave a note on the front door that says "Raw welcome" every time we channel, just hoping they might be in the neighborhood and stop by. No, good questions. I have thoughts, but I want to check in with you. Austin, do you want to? Or Trish?
Yeah, sure. I'll give my response. It's we get this question somewhat frequently in some form or another, and I think the simple answer would just be no. But my in-depth answer is that Raw came through when Don and Carla and Jim were hoping to seek the highest and best source that they could in channeling, and through their desire to serve others, and they weren't specifically seeking a contact with Ra. I haven't gotten the sense specifically that we would be channeling Ra at any point necessarily. That's not really something in my intuition for the future. But, I did talk about how cautious we were based on the protocols and how LL Research has done things up to this point. That doesn't mean that we aren't open to, expanding and seeing what is possible, with care and caution, but seeing what is possible and seeing where we might go with channeling or other sorts of service. But in terms of specifically Raw, I've not gotten the sense that that is something that we're being prepared to do or that we necessarily have a desire to do, but I'm just speaking for myself.
Trish, Gary, any thoughts?
Yeah, ditto to what Austin said. I think there's definitely an interest in expanding and challenging ourselves when it comes to channeling. pushing ourselves in safe ways to further seek the creator. But like Austin, I'm not putting any pressure on us or expectations for us to resume that contact. And in a very selfish way, I would be personally a little bit afraid to reestablish contact, just knowing the danger of what they encountered in doing so, the consequences, potential consequences. So there's a little service to self moment there for me, but open to seeing what the future holds, obviously.
I don't think that's service to self. I think
It's
that
just selfish.
it depends where it comes from. Like, is it fear? Is it
Yeah.
wisdom balanced with love that understands that protecting the integrity of the self is helpful?
Mhm.
Yeah, and ditto to those two. Like most people, and sure like you as well, Nate, who read the Law of One, just want more of it. I can get frustrated with the limitations of conscious channeling. Even when Carla was channeling, there was questions that I asked that couldn't hit the level of depth and accuracy and profundity that Ra could, just by virtue of unconscious channeling. So I would love to hear from Ra again personally, but like Austin said, it's Ra came to the group and we aren't actively seeking Ra. What we are actively seeking is the highest and best, however that may look. And personally, I am open to bold new adventures, to taking this ship that is LL Research, this beautiful thing, out into those deep and uncharted waters again to see what is there. Is that a Ra contact? Is that something else? I don't know. But at the same time, our I don't know, primary is the right word. We have a sacred mission to safeguard this. And I don't mean safeguard it into stasis, but to ensure that this, I think LL Research is pretty unique on planet Earth. And and it serves, it's a powerful beacon to wanderers all over the planet. And we need to preserve this ship. We need to ensure that the energies that Carla, Don, and Jim set in motion are honored, while growing, while innovating, while seeing what the future brings, of course. But there may be a moment where the wind blows in a certain way and circumstance and the stars align, and we sense that there's open waters in front of us and out we can go. As to the Ra context specifically, I would echo what Trish said. And that is a circumstance whereby it is a white hot tightrope testing of the self. I mean, if you're familiar with the journey that Don, Carla, and Jim took through the Ra contact, the slightest lapse, Jim held anger for Don for overly long because of an issue about publishing a book, just a mundane thing. But that anger created separation, led to his being bitten by that spider, which, swelled and potentially could have led to renal failure and so forth. Carla was under constant assault, and the toll it took on her body is horrible. I mean, if you see pictures of her, she's a skeleton almost. She's rail thin because her body was being used up, and she was, she was receiving, according to Ra, receiving hints to step out in front of traffic. So all one's life then becomes under a microscope, and the smallest irregularity becomes potential to catastrophe as we would measure these things in the relative world. And not only, however, that would all be more palatable if it was just the lifetime that was being risked. I think a lot of us would give our lives for something that we believe in truly, if we knew it could be of service to the world. In certain circumstances, I would too. If I could save my wife by doing so, I would give my life. But what the circumstance of the Ra contact is so science fictionally bizarre, it's hard to wrap the head around. But they learn, I don't know, 2/3, 3/4 into the contact, that Carla wasn't risking her incarnation, at which time, she would, she would die and go through a healing process and reincarnate again to continue her journey of positive polarity. Instead, she was risking her soul through that weird situation of stealing her spirit and mind away to negative time space. And if you stop to think about, I'll wrap up my answer soon here, sorry. I know we're way over time, Jonathan. If you stop to think about what that means, if you are a loving being who loves other people, who loves the joy of creation, who loves the sunlight, who loves companionship and friendship and mutual collaboration and service to others, and then you're imprisoned in a darkness where the only way out of that darkness is to become negative yourself, and to be in a world literally where nobody is your friend. In fact, everybody is seeking to abuse you, to manipulate you, to enslave you, and you've lost connection to everything you loved, everything you were, your heart itself. You have to, according to Ra, give that up and pursue the path of negative polarity, which means you're enslaved and you have to become an enslaver. You have to seek harm to others. You have to hurt other people. And there's few worse consequences I can imagine. So I love Austin and Trish dearly. Could I put either one of those two into a situation where they serve as an instrument? No, under no circumstance. So I've said to Rob before that if you would appreciate contact with us, I hope you come up with a better way for it than to involve risking of the soul. I'm all for risking a life in service to others, but that other price seems really high price to pay. But who knows? Carla and Don did it, though. You guys know how it ended too. Had it not been for the raw contact, I don't think Don would have had the end that he had. But it's all speculation.
Yeah. No, well said. And I thank you for that long explanation, because I think that was worth it. And I think it is definitely worth bearing in mind for anyone who's asking that question. And as you alluded to, I don't think that's being selfish. I think that's just a matter of balancing love and wisdom and power and knowing the difference between what's wise and loving and what's not so much. So thank you for doing that. We are indeed about at the end of our time, and I did want to ask Austin, Trish, Gary, did you have any last thoughts, reflections wanted to share before we wrap up for today?
Just a bunch of love and gratitude for you, Jonathan, and for everybody that's here, and for Gary and Trish. And it's so great to be here with all of you.
Yeah, thank you everybody for sharing your hearts with us. You're so authentic, you're beautiful, and Trish and I know, are going to walk away really energized for this sunny day in Louisville because of this meeting.
Yeah, and in a way similar to when we meet in our public channeling circles, like it felt like a really awesome experience to be a crystal with you guys for the previous hour and a half. So thank you all for having us.
Thank you. Well, thank the three of you for all you have done and continue to do in service to others. And thank you to all our friends at L&L Research for all they continue to do in service to others. Thank you for everyone who joined us on this Zoom call. It felt really nice and really special. I appreciate the time and teachings and good vibes we're able to share together. And thanks to everyone who is watching this recording at some other space, time, and time space. Until next time, in the love and light of the one infinite creator, Adonai, namaste. Love you all much.
Love you all. Thank you.
Adonai.